I think the transcription was on. I don't know if that.
Oh,
No, that's what happens. Mr. Bernstein,
as always, on mute.
you're on mute.
Hey,
There's the
everybody.
depend.
It's already Sunday, March 8th, and it's Tinderbox Meetup with Michael Becker. I'm Mark Bernstein, the designer of Tinderbox, and these are terrible and wonderful times. So without further delay, here's Michael.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to our March 8th meetup. Typically, what we do is we go around the room and have people introduce themselves. We don't have anyone new today, although Mr. Rogers has a new background that I haven't seen, so I'll have to explain that. And then we jump into a theme or talk about projects we're working on. We don't have a theme today, so let's just go around the room and talk about projects. I don't really necessarily have anything formally prepared, but I can show you some of the work I've been playing with this week. And Mark, I do have one kind of question for you, but I want to jump into. But before we do
Okay.
that, anybody have anything they're working on? What's going on? What are your thoughts, questions, comments,
Ha-
projects?
Has everybody in the Zoom tried using Claude with Tinderbox, or is that still a minority of users? I mean, Mark, obviously, I know, yeah, and I've made my first tepid attempts at it, but Chuck, have you tried using it at all?
Not yet.
Okay.
I'm fooling around with several different AI approaches. It's on my to-do list. I just have a lot of things that are major distractions and things that absolutely have to get done. So
You mean like work and those
well,
pesky kinds of serving clients, that kind of thing?
work and um, my son living free in the house, but with serious medical conditions. So
Yeah.
the opposite of your situation. You're taking care of your mother. We're taking
Yeah,
care
I'm
of our
cooking him
son.
breakfast. I'm taking out the garbage. You know, hanging. She took me out for margaritas and guacamole the other night too after class. That was fun. So different situation for sure.
Chuck, I presume Claude OpenClaw, is on your radar.
For
It is. I'm very anxious to start fooling around with it, but I don't need another distraction at the moment, which is why I have not yet stepped
Yes,
into it.
especially given the anecdotes about some of the hijinks that uh, OpenClaw has gotten itself up to.
Yeah, I'm not gonna fool around with OpenClaw until I can have a real sandbox system set up, which is one of the
Yeah,
things on my list.
I think Jacob Evans has the best comment there. Just be prepared to manage your blast radius.
yeah.
Right. Yeah.
It is going to blow up on you, and the question is, do you
Yes.
want a Chernobyl level blow up or a firecracker in your hand blow up?
But since you already have the house set up for the convenience of the AI, uh, that could be spectacularly cool. It could also be spectacularly bad.
Yeah, and one way or another, it will be spectacular. Yeah.
Yeah.
One of
I mean, give you an example of, my most recent AI use. Um, my 2006 Prius, so 20 years old, um, had the brake lines rupture on me. And I just put in about $3,000 less than a year ago to finally replace the original battery in the car. It's a hybrid, so it has what was nickel metal hydride battery. And I was really hoping I could get another 2 to 3 years out of the car to wait around for a better EV vehicle to show up, um, and more charging stations and things like that because my wife has serious range anxiety. Um, so I'm suddenly facing: do I put another $3,000 to $4,000 into a car that I'm just trying to keep on the road for another year or two, or do I go ahead and start trying to find if there's a decent vehicle out there worth investing in? So I've been using AI. Other family members have been using AI. So we've had a kind of a family experience. Say, whose AI comes up with the best, most useful information in doing a search for a car.
mm,
Rather pedantic, but in some respects, you learn a lot from things like that. It's real world. It's different from what I do every day. I mean, I spend most of my time with AI doing research on tech issues and how to make this work, or what's the right strategy for accomplishing these objectives, or things of that nature, which are very, very much my everyday business. So this is an example of just using it for something rather mundane, but in the grand scheme of things, awfully important to my wife and I.
So,
Um,
Mark, one of the little hurdles that I had in working with the Claude desktop and Tinderbox is the bias I had that Claude was seeing what I was seeing. And then at some point it occurred to me that Claude doesn't see anything. Claude is working right with the XML file and can't tell what is displayed in the UI. And part of it was I was looking at the wrong note while Claude was working on other notes similarly named. Um, and in the course of describing I realized that I had to describe what the UI looked like to it because it couldn't see the UI. Has that been your experience that you have to kind of make this sort of shift in how you talk to the AI?
Well, you do because it knows so little, but in fact, uh, it should not be looking at the XML at all.
Hmm.
It should be talking, but sometimes if it can't get the MCP, the Model Context Protocol, working, it will try to hack the XML and can get quite far. So that's one risk. You want to be sure that MCP is actually hooked up.
So how does it know what an attribute value is? I mean, what is the MCP some sort of intermediary?
Yeah, MCP gives it currently 9 tools. One of them get notes, which gets notes by path and lets it retrieve whatever attributes it thinks are going to be useful, and automatically gives it things like the name of the container, the name of the prototype, things like that. And it's a entirely textual interface that replicates lots of parts of Tinderbox. So it's still living in a completely textual world, with one exception. Alex Strick van Linschoten suggested in the forum that it would be useful if we could supply on request a picture of the view pane. And it's just whatever view you currently have in the view pane. Uh, we, it's known to work with map, which is what it's for. I'm not sure it works with some of the minor views. And it can look at it, and it can actually reason about some things about the layout that would be harder for it to figure out if it just had the X and Y coordinates. But it can go a
So,
long way with just the X and Y coordinates.
so the MCP is the interface that the AI has to the Tinderbox file.
Exactly.
How does that relate to a skill? You posted something about creating skills. Anthropic has a skills feature for Claude.
Yeah. Skills are canned prompts that apply to a context. Context is the wrong word. For example, for Claude Code, uh, the simplify skill is essentially a set of prompts to 3 subagents to look at whatever you've just done and look for various ways to make it cleaner and simpler and more accurate. And uh, I've not done anything with skills in Tinderbox yet, but it's certainly an area that could be developed some more.
Does what I want when we watched Andreas, I watched the video of Andreas's presentation on using Claude, and I saw a lot of terminal commands and Apple script type. Is that the MCP that's doing that?
I think that I have to go and look at that talk again under a magnifying glass. I think that he is using a MCP approach which Jacob and someone else independently did before I did the native MCP, building an MCP server around Tinderbox using AppleScript.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. And so hmm, I'm trying to figure out when I ask Claude to move a note, it has to talk to the MCP and identify that note, and then look within its repertoire of abilities and see if it can move, and then it moves it to the other container. So all of that is mediated by the MCP.
Right.
Okay. Um, and the AppleScript one seems to be a broader, it's a fairly robust suite of um, commands within AppleScript um, that I'm just trying to again figure. So Claude doesn't really look at the Tinderbox file. It just looks at wherever you tell it to focus its attention at that moment to do whatever the task is that you want it to do. It doesn't really have an overarching view of the document like we do when we're looking at. We're seeing the UI presentation. We're not seeing the XML presentation. I thought I was viewing the UI and Claude had some view of the file itself. But
Well, for example, uh, I prompt and I believe the MCP prompts Claude to begin a session by looking at uh, slash hints slash AI slash whichever AI you are
mhm,
slash readings, and to find out what notes there are and to read them. And if once it knows what the intended topic is, to also look at the same path but notes and see if there are scan all of the titles of the notes and read any notes that really are on topic. Uh, so if you are continuing a conversation, there will be notes from the previous conversation, but it doesn't try to load everything it's ever talked about in this document.
but it doesn't have and this is probably attributing free will to it. It doesn't have it can't under its own initiative just scan the whole document. That has to be in response to a prompt.
Uh, it could. It knows better than to do that because every word, every token that it absorbs uh, costs you money and potentially costs you money and reduces the amount of data that it can process after it's finished the reading.
Mhm.
So reading whole documents is something Claude is taught to avoid whenever possible.
Yeah, again, I'm just trying to wrap my brain around how an AI is interacting, viewing interacting Tinderbox versus, a human. It's obviously totally different. I never see the XML. All I ever see is the UI. Claude can't see the UI. All he sees is the portions of the XML that the prompt directs it to. And it's interesting.
Yeah,
And I can't absorb the whole XML, but I mean I can scan it and find, or not the XML, the UI. I can scan it and locate what I may be interested in at that time. It's interesting. It's very much like holding its hand and being very uh, specific. And it's not going to be like an inspired assistant. It'll do things, but that's why what I found is that basically you have to know what you want to do with Claude. You can't just, interact with it and discover something.
yeah. And even where it's reasonably good at acting on its own, it's just wandering around. And yeah, one of the things about Claude is it has very little motivation.
Mhm.
Uh, and so until you supply some, then it can be too motivated.
It's interesting. I haven't figured out what I'm going to have it do next, but it's the challenge of using Tinderbox is you got to figure out what you want to do with Tinderbox before you can do anything productive with it. So then I got to figure out what's
Yeah,
productive to do with Claude.
yeah, yes. Or you reverse it, like Andres was saying, and say, "Hey, Claude, do it for me in Tinderbox." In Claude was, if you recall the demo, it was creating notes, creating adornments, doing linking, and it actually on its own decided to color code different people to create a visualization that would help you distinguish one person versus another in a dialogue.
Where did that come from? I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that because that sounds almost as though it had, where did the prompt to do that come from?
The prompt, it didn't come from the prompt. He didn't say color code or organize or analyze the people. It just did it itself.
But he did have prior input to Claude that probably included a lot of the help documentation that would talk about color as an example and talk about it as a way of highlighting different categories of notes. So maybe
Well,
you just picked up on that.
that is true because he had, well, unbeknownst to all of us, what he had done was previously index all 200 or so conversations we have up on our YouTube channel.
Hmm.
And so I suspect Claude remembered something from one of those conversations.
Well,
Yeah.
and Claude has seen a whole lot of card sorting exercises and box and arrow diagrams, and lots of them had color. And uh, I've noticed that like if I tell it to categorize things, in fact, let me show you this. This was a couple of days early last week. Where's the window? There, I
So
guess that's the window.
is Claude one entity that lives in the cloud and he's like God, he's everywhere. And when you're talking to him, does my Claude know the things that your Claude did about Tinderbox? I mean, is his knowledge of Tinderbox growing as more people use Tinderbox?
No. Uh, each time you start a new conversation with Claude, you are talking to a fresh copy of some model. I generally, these days, am using, I guess, Sonnet 4.6. And Sonnet 4.6 is a frozen with its training set at some moment in time uh, when got christened Sonnet 4.6. Uh, Now, there is a setting in Claude and Claude Desktop which is by default on and says that Anthropic can use your prompts both for research and training. And you can turn that off and it doesn't degrade Claude. And in fact, I have, but obviously it's probably a bit more collegial to uh, let Claude, let Anthropic have that data. Um, I have a list that some of you know from Backstage. That's basically a roadmap, and it contains a list of 4,800 and odd issues that people have raised that I've understood well enough to say this goes onto the list for short-term fixing. Mostly, I try to keep long-term speculative things in a separate list. But I moved a copy of this list into a fresh Tinderbox document and let Claude categorize it and break it up into a spatial hypertext just to see if it turned out to be useful. And here is the overview of the whole thing. This is the 1,421 open issues related to Tinderbox, and it's clustered them mostly. They all started up top here in this gray color, and these are the topical clusters. And for example, This cluster is something. Ah, yes. This is stuff about text in map view, which has been mostly cleared out. This is stuff to do in attribute browser, which has not been cleared out. But this is a really big table sorting exercise. I did not tell it to color code and was in fact a little bit annoyed because it wanted to give every cluster a unique color, which is I don't think is really necessary. I'd use color differently. And it didn't take the trouble to learn what how Tinderbox colors work. And so it assumed that Tinderbox colors were the same as Unix terminal colors. And so it just used colors that it could use in the terminal. And Tinderbox doesn't know from these colors. Uh, so that entailed a certain amount of no, make everything that you called bright violet into a different color. Uh, but in fact, it does quite an interesting job. It's it chose to cluster things mostly by which piece of the UI they involve, which is not inspired, but not stupid, and somewhat better than what I had been working with, which is this undifferentiated list in chronological order of what people had reported.
So I have a question about the MCP.
Yeah,
And I've only read, your descriptions on Backstage and elsewhere, um, and have not yet fooled around with this. So this is perhaps very naive. But one of the things that I didn't see, and I'm wondering if it's just because there's another way to do it, is there a way to let Claude gain access to the current focus, the current note that has been selected, so that you select a note and you ask Claude to look at the note that's currently selected. Is that something the MCP supports?
um, one of the things that MCP supports is our action and evaluate tools, which
Hmm.
work with the action language. We only give Claude a little grasp of the action language, but of course there is now a selected operator that
Hmm.
returns a list of selected notes, and it seems to be quite happy to use that.
Okay.
I would normally say look instead of saying look at the selected note, I'd probably just name the note. But that's a matter of taste as much as anything.
And you said there were nine elements in the list. Can you list those off, or do you have those off the top of your head?
Sure, well, I can take a try. There's get notes, which retrieves notes, gets their path prototype, information about them, and any attributes that it thinks it wants to know. There's set values, which is the takes a note and an attribute and a value and changes the value. There's get document, which gets information about the current document, which should be the document that's active. Things can sometimes get confused where Claude is looking at one document and you're looking at another. Uh, Set document, if it wants to switch, Claude is not at present permitted to open documents, so it's only able to switch amongst a set of documents that you've opened for it. Uh, there's get view, which gets the current main view as an image. There's evaluate, which evaluates a Tinderbox expression. There's action, which is it's called do, which performs a Tinderbox action. Evaluate returns the result, and do just does what it's told. And I think that's the repertoire. I may have missed one. I can easily pop this up. I believe if you look in the developers section of Claude's preferences, or it will give you a list, and Gemini can also give you a list. Bear with me just a second. The code, as always, is the literal
Somewhere
truth.
else.
Oh, and create link.
Yeah.
Oh, but with the perform action tool, Claude can literally do anything that you can do with an action, which is most things. David,
Are those notes, those 1,400 issues, as written by someone on the outside asking a question, trying to solve a problem, or have they been curated by you, interpreted by you?
the latter.
Okay, so you have forced them. If someone says postal code, you're going to say zip code. I mean, I'm the synonym
Most of the
challenge.
time. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly where you're going with this, but
Well, it's
a lot of it is copied and pasted from email, from the forum. Uh,
okay. Well,
Someone has a forum post and it says, I tried this and it didn't give me the right result until I added these extra parentheses. In fact, Chuck had one of those,
Several of
uh,
those.
several
too
of
much,
those, but
too much,
you had one that I finally clobbered.
Oh, good.
too much Lisp. Uh, okay, so you contradict. I think you. I heard you contradict yourself. That the notes you are using the language as posted by someone outside struggling to understand, attempting to understand how Tinderbox works. You're using their language. And the imprecision, what I'm getting at is the imprecision, the ambiguity, the multiple ways the English language can say essentially the same thing. And running it through your master filter, semantic filter, is, I'll say, cheating. I mean, it's necessary, but it's the outside world is not carrying your 40 years of knowledge about, or 30 years. Does that make sense?
Well,
As you freeze.
no, yes, certainly it makes sense. But I still didn't have the list in this sort of uh, clustered format. I might have hoped that it would use a more interesting principle for clustering, and if I do it again, I may force it to use a more interesting principle, or I may take this and say, now let's discuss other ways we could do this. But this is what you do with a student or a graduate student.
Yeah, you pick up the crappy data that's available, and
Yeah,
that's a wonderful. I like the analogy of, well, all Claude knows is the colors in, was it the UI for terminal,
yeah.
and yeah, well, okay, thank you.
Dave,
So, does the MCP, if I tell Claude to find all notes with a certain string, does it use the find function within Tinderbox, or does it use its own, I read every note and somehow identify each note that contains something?
the Get Notes tool has a built-in search facility. So it can evaluate a query a lot like an agent would. And that's the very first note that Claude reads when it starts to initialize its context. So it knows that. And that's what it'll use most of the time. I have seen it using find, though. And I don't know why, but it's perfectly valid. And you can certainly tell it to use find.
Well, I mean, that's what I'm confused. Claude can't see the menu bar. I mean, does Claude know what actions are available from the menu bar? I mean, it's
No, it can't use the menu bars find,
mhm.
but it can use things like collect, uh, collect parent find query. It can write an action which will collect the paths that satisfy a query.
Okay. And and by the same mechanism, I guess it can explode a note.
Uh, it actually cannot, but it would. It doesn't have any way of finding the explode command, but it's actually going to be reasonably good at doing an explode the way you could tell an assistant take this big lump of text and break it into separate notes, dividing it at every new title
Mhm.
or every second level heading.
So,
And it's absolutely fine at that.
so I think for newbies like me, the one of the things about getting your head around this is that Claude doesn't see the menu bar, can't, things that you can do with the menu bar, Claude can't do, but Claude can achieve the same outcome, usually through some other mechanism where you give it some direction.
Right.
Okay.
And it is a very strange and challenging problem. What we're doing with the MCP tools is creating an alternate user interface for using Tinderbox uh,
Verbally.
for yeah, something that's really good at text, pretty good at certain sorts of diagram interpretation, and absolute rubbish at lots of other things.
Okay.
Okay. I do have some curiosity. I've got two questions in this dialogue. One is, we're so fixated on Claude. Can someone help me understand Claude versus ChatGPT versus complexity or perplexity? Like, when to use one tool versus the other? And honestly, Mark, I'd also be interested as a subtopic to that, your views on Anthropic's position with the U.S. government and their reaction on their use of their tool for the whole weapons of war
That's
thing.
not fair, Michael.
That would be really
You just
interesting.
mixed up two horribly complex problems in one
I
question.
did. I did.
Okay, let's. Which was the first? Why
So,
Claude?
like, yeah, and then I want to ask my second really
Yes,
question. Second real question
we.
was, um, as much as I'm enjoying the conversation of AI doing stuff in my tool for me, like managing Tinderbox for me. So I think I hear a lot of our conversations around, let's have AI help me use Tinderbox, like go in and do stuff for me. Whereas my primary use of AI has been, and that's why I've kind of not really gotten too deep into having Claude or Gemini or OpenAI do things for me in Tinderbox, because I know how to do what I want to do in Tinderbox. I want to have it help me think, like help me discern, like write articles with me. So my use case of AI is, here's my base notes for the article I want to write. Can you help me organize this, clean up all my typos, clean up all my vulgarity, because I might get really pissed and like, one of the AIs comes back and says, well, I appreciate your emotional sentiment. That's not appropriate in this form of writing, which I get quite often, which is great. And then what I do is I tell it, hey, and it's shocking on how often I have to remind it. Please give me native Markdown, or I've trained it to have a personal Markdown strategies to allow me to parse things into attributes, and I have to remind it constantly to do that. And then I copy that over and paste it into Tinderbox, and then use Explode or use a stream parser and have it do all the magical stuff that I want Tinderbox to do for me. I don't hear us talking about that very much.
No, and
So I'd like to hear other
yeah.
people's thoughts on like how are they actually using these tools to think and to write their articles and to produce output.
Okay, let me tackle the first one and get that put
Okay.
that to the side because I think that's got a good answer. Uh,
Okay.
right now, Tinderbox is known to talk to Gemini, Claude Code, and Claude. Uh, it, those are probably the three largest models, most widely used models that support MCP. We should be able to talk to Olama. I have a machine problem at the moment, which gets in the way of doing much usefully with Olama, but we will get past that. It There are also all sorts of relevant models on our machines built into the Apple system, and there will be more like that coming. I don't hold a particular brief for Claude, but it's probably the easiest to get started with. And so it's the one I reach for most often here. Claude Code is where I spend a lot of time at present. Uh, and I have a little bit of a beef with Google, uh, which we need not get into here, but so I'm not real happy with Google, and Gemini runs in the terminal, which I suspect people will be a little less comfortable with than Claude Desktop. So that's why I tend to talk primarily about Claude. But just about everything that I say about Claude applies equally to Gemini.
Okay. Okay. And how about the latter one? Or how about, yeah, Bruce, go ahead.
I was just going to ask Mark, so do you restrict your use of Claude only to the desktop version?
No, I've been doing a good deal with the um, with the terminal version too. I'm not a big fan of working in the terminal, but it's a good place to for Claude Code.
And without going into detail, is your preference for Claude Terminal versus Google Terminal something that might cause us to give pause to using a version of Google Terminal?
No,
Okay,
no.
fair enough.
In fact, for a while back in January, I was regularly hitting my daily limits for Claude time around 2 o'clock. And so I did get into a rhythm where I'd start the day in Claude and end the day in Gemini, spreading the wear around. Sometime in February, they relaxed the daily limits a little bit. And so I stopped doing that. But lately, I've been discovering new ways to consume more tokens than ever. So we may be headed back to that.
I don't know if Claude does this, but one of the things that Gemini will do is you can show it a video, like a how-to video, and then it will understand that information, incorporate that, and then help you based on the video.
Cool.
Yeah, I keep finding that as I push Google to do things, or Gemini to do things. For example, if I don't understand, it gives me certain information and it has the menu wrong. If I screenshot what the correct menu looks like, of course, it has to do that ridiculous apologizing, and then and then it moves on to get to the helpful information. But that's one thing also. I mean, maybe others run into this. Um, the certainty factor is ever present. You know, when it's 100% wrong, it's 100% certain. I never see a nuanced answer.
Just like humans.
Well, yeah, yeah, that's a conversation.
Or I should say politicians.
Dave.
So I'm afraid I can't really answer your second question, Michael. I don't do that much thinking. I'm curious whether or not Claude, as it's currently configured with the MCP for Tinderbox, does it know anything about export code? Can it look at a preview or look at the export file and make some assessment of the HTML or what is likely to appear?
Uh, it doesn't have a way of accessing the export. However, if you do an export, it can look at the exported files, and it's quite knowledgeable about HTML, and it will find the meaningful problems. If you ask it to, it will find all of the problems, but BBEdit will find all of the problems. But Claude has better judgment about what you really need to fix and what the standard says yeah, you ought to fix this.
Does it have any insight into how export code works within Tinderbox, includes and things of that nature?
Oh, I think you'd need to explain it, but it's a fast learner. And when you can see in readings that we have like one page that explains what you really need to know about actions. You could probably give it one page or less of what it really wants to know about export code.
I think Andreas fed it all of ATB ref or something. Now, how he went about doing that, I don't know. But
Um,
I
and
agree.
I would avoid that because that's going to eat up a lot of context. That was in fact, the very first thing I did with MCP is tell it to try to read ATB ref, and it says, "Yeah, I see it." And I said, "Okay, go read all of that." And it cheated. It read a couple of page summaries
yeah.
and stopped there
So in that regard, it's
because,
no different than students in my
yeah,
class.
But Michael, what my point is that there are things that I like to do in Tinderbox that, I can go to the forum and ask for help. Or to take one example, I had some strange corruption in my Tinderbox file where my created dates shifted in time. And I know what the actual date was because I have the exported HTML files. So every month I manually go through and enter every April, update all the times. I can instruct Claude to do that and make that busy work go away. There are some things I might like to do that it may be easier for me to work with Claude to figure it out than to get into a conversation on the forum. But as far as I really don't know how to respond to assisting in my thinking. I'd be more inclined to just do the normal things I do when I find there's something I don't know about that I want to have an opinion on or a view of, that I'll go to the search engine and find relevant sources of information about that, rather than using an AI to answer those questions. I've done it casually a couple times, like what happened to Belgian prisoners of war in World War II. And it knew a lot about that. But now, how good was that information? I don't know. I wasn't going to go quality assurance check it, but and I'll talk to it about medical stuff like Dr. ChatGPT and Dr. Claude are now my primary care physicians, but I don't need it to help me think. Uh, and I can do research on my own as long as the resources are available.
But if we go back to the very roots of the meetup and Michael Becker's using Tinderbox to make his uh, reports repurposable, modular and repurposable.
Uh-huh.
That's an interesting task. And it's one that comes up all the time when using an AI for anything. You want it to be able to continue this later and build on what you're doing now later, which means recording some notes about what the modules are and what the plan was and how you think now you're going to reuse this document in the future in other ways. This is a very interesting note-taking task, and it's one where, for the first time, we can reasonably do empirical experiments. Does this approach or that approach actually yield a better result? Because we can take two sets of notes and you in the future have one instance of Claude use one set and another instance of Claude use the other set and see which one is more effective.
Okay, you've lost me on instance. So what's an instance of Claude? Are they separated in time? Are they simultaneous in two different windows?
So we make some notes now, and then in a month we fire up Claude in terminal window 1 and Claude in terminal window 2. And we tell window 1, use these notes. And here's a task. And we tell the one in terminal 2, use the other notes. And here's the same task. And they go merrily along their way. And maybe one does better at its task. Then you find out whether it's the notes were better or pure luck or some other factor. But if you were doing it with real people, there'd be the difference between the two people and the difference between the style of notes. And you'd have to do it with hundreds and hundreds of people in order to get any certainty that the notes were a factor.
Okay. And what about? I mean, are others, going back to my point about creating output? Like, what kind of output are other people trying to produce here? Is it just messing around and having to do it, or are you actually having your AI efforts help you write an article, help you write a report, help you analyze and create a table for that report, help you quickly discover different topics and concepts? How are people using that?
Well, I think it's just Phil and Bruce and I are the only three people. When I asked earlier in the thing if any, if everybody in the forum or the Zoom was using AI. So we haven't heard from Phil on what he's been doing with it, but Bruce and I have spoken up. Not to put you on the spot, Phil, if you're away from your desk.
Well, right now I'm just trying to learn how to use it, but um, I think my plan is to kind of use it as a way to structure my notes on the literature that I'm gathering for various manuscripts and proposals. Create some, I call them concept maps, but maps of that information that I've gathered, and see how it maps it out, what's the logic it uses versus what I would use.
All right. Hey, before I get too far, I think might be a piece you're missing, Dave. Is Jacob Evans had produced what he called a Claude skill. So you go into the customized menu of Claude and you upload Jacob's Tinderbox skill, and he created a series of XML or JSON files that is what Tinderbox is using to understand how to do things. So it's not the complete ATB ref, but it is a structured set of markdown files and JSON files and JavaScript files that is how Jacob, and therefore as a proxy, the method that Andreas did, is making Claude be able to interact with Tinderbox.
And he's got that on Git somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, see if I can pull it up. Jacob Evans. Yeah, let's see if I can find it.
If I understand things, this is a parallel approach to the MCP approach that
This
you've
is a
been working on,
parallel
Mark.
approach. So what this is doing is it's teaching Claude the nature of Tinderbox and the use of the Apple script to control Tinderbox to be able to do stuff. So you can't do anything that Andres was talking about, to the extent that I understand it, without uploading this skill to the skills thing. And you can just basically attach a zip file and it unextracts it, sticks it in the right browser, and does it.
What?
So I think that is a missing. That is a missing piece from the conversation Andreas was giving us. Where did my Zoom go? I can't find my Zoom to stop sharing. Huh. Zoom. Okay. Where did my Zoom windows go? I can't stop sharing. Oh, here it's up here.
I'm amazed at how Zoom continually moves things around, and all of us feel lost when we're trying to use it.
Well, the problem is I've got so many windows, and
Yeah, I do too.
that little Zoom bar just goes all over the place. Yeah. So that's an important thing to think about. Let's see if we can find his Git on that. I think it's on the community somewhere. And then what? And let's go. Let me go back to my part 1A/B question. And let me make it more general. It's not just like Anthropic's position on the use of their models for war, but just in general. Like, there was a study I just came across yesterday. I might be able to find it. Big surprise. There was an MIT research that looked at all of the privacy policies of the public AIs. And it was, big surprise, determined that they're using our chats to help train their models, right? And so what are the privacy considerations or privacy implications about that? And I've also heard that I don't know if it's just in theory, in practice, your interaction with chat is actually subpoenable, or your interactions with the AIs are actually subpoenable records. So if you're looking to do something nefarious, try not to use the AI model to do that, because just like Google search, it could come back and put you in jail, or create some other undesirable outcome. So what are your thoughts about that? I mean, from a societal perspective, how do we do that? And I'll conclude it with this one statement. I remember going back 10 years now. I was in a conversation with an FTC regulators, and one of the lawyers on the panel I was on with said, well, if you don't agree to LinkedIn's terms of service, then don't use it. And my reaction to her was, so you're telling me therefore I can't be employed? Because if in my industry in particular, if you don't have a curated LinkedIn profile, you're not employable, right? So at what point are we forced to, if we choose to participate in this economic system that we've created for ourselves, use these tools, even though our use of these tools could put us in fairly significant social, legal, financial jeopardy? What are all of your thoughts on that, and how do we manage that?
Welcome to the real world.
Okay.
It's ugly. And my other observation is that the only reason why law enforcement hasn't totally lost the game in dealing with crime is because, for some reason, criminals are lazy. And because they're lazy, they go and use the quickest, easiest way to do something. And that winds up creating the breadcrumbs that investigations, whether they use subpoenas or not, can use to find who. And Brian Krebs, if you don't watch him, is really good at doing the research to find out who this alias is behind certain malware campaign and find the actual individual and out. It's just fascinating. And invariably, what you see is just they were lazy or they were not very competent or what have you. So, it all comes down to human nature. Give us a shiny tool that makes it look easy, and we'll use it.
Yeah. But for those that want to be protected in this new world, is that possible, or are we just you just got to throw up your hands? Well, I'm of the opinion at this point, personally, throw up your hands. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
do what you can, but I'm unwilling to retard my growth and stand on that that position of thou shalt not pass, and then end up having the whole world just pass me right by like the French Maginot Line, and just be left taken over.
Yeah.
Odds are we're only 2, 3 years out from being able to run Sonnet class models locally, and that will relieve us of some of this dilemma. There's still the LinkedIn problem. There's still the problem of monopoly. There's still the problem of World War III, which no longer seems nearly as 2027 as it used to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Okay.
but also, just on a mundane level, you know how Tinderbox sometimes, when you switch to map view, it'll draw all the links in the wrong place and then blink, and then they'll go back where you want them. It doesn't do that anymore. I finally got rid of that. And this was a long session with Claude. Here's what we're seeing. Here's the sort of place where it happens. What could possibly be causing this? And it was a long, complicated race condition with the pain splitter of all things. So, yep, yay. And don't do that again. But just getting rid of these long-term complicated nuisances is something that, Claude's got nothing better to do.
Yeah. But you say Claude has nothing better to do, but at the same time, you're interacting with it.
Oh yeah. Oh
There is
no, no,
so
I'm still sitting in the big chair, and I'm saying, yeah, this is my problem, and you're going to solve my problem. But that's the sort of problem where I look at it for 6 hours or so, and yeah, you're still no further. In fact, you're behind where you were, and you're just miserable. And you spend the last 2 hours of the day cleaning up for the damage you've done. And you swear, I'm not going to tackle this bug again for a while.
yeah.
Well, Chuck Wade, this might be something up your alley. I've got Little Snitch, which I think is a great thing to have, but I have no idea what it's telling me. And it's been in my mind to kind of copy and paste some aspect of that report and feed it to Chat GPT or Claude and say, is there anything here that I need to be worried about? Um, does does that make a good use case?
That is probably a reasonable use case, and my current expectation is it would probably do a reasonable job of telling you what's going on. Um, you actually hit on something that I'm giving a lot of thought to, which is, again, I work with networks. Um, I can go to an AI system, I can ask them some questions about how I might configure a certain network configuration. It'll get me stuff that may or may not be accurate, but it's not really the problem that I and other people involved with networks deal with on a regular basis. It's a lot closer to what Mark is talking about, which is you have a specific problem in a specific context. And without providing that context, the AI is kind of, well, here's what the manuals say. Well, the manuals are wrong in many cases. And so I think where there's a tremendous value, I'll extrapolate from what Mark was saying. I have a dozen network devices, switches, routers, wireless access points, and I've got a bunch of servers, and they all interact, and they have, they can have are very dissimilar ways of describing network conditions. What I would love to be able to do is to supply a bunch of configurations and say something isn't working and this problem is not working. Where is the configuration error that I missed? Because it is impossible for a human being to go through that much complexity and without a lot of digging and tracing of packets and things that are just hugely time consuming, can you find a reasonable answer? Sometimes you just sleep on it for 3 or 4 days and say, well, maybe try this thing. And AI has a lot more patience and a lot more of the ability to go and look at every single detail, which humans are not good at, and come up with observations that may help the human figure out what the problem is. And so I think that's an area where I see AI being very productive, and it's probably what I want to most focus on as I start moving into that space. But to get there, you have to have an awful lot of domain knowledge, and you have to have the ability to figure out how would you pull that information together to feed it into an AI so that it would actually be useful, and how do you tell the AI what to be looking for? I mean, those are all very complex questions in their own right. It's just that maybe at the end of that process, you've got a tool that could be far more valuable. And I'm
And
very intrigued with what Mark has been doing with Tinderbox along those lines. I mean, I'm much more interested in his ability to feed it a core dump, a old term I know. David understands what I'm talking about. Dave, Eddie, but feed it a core dump and have it come back and say, "Oh well, this is your problem."
Uh, Another good war story from last week. About 2 months ago, Tom Diaz was working on mastering JSON parsing. And so he got a big hunk of JSON from some source, a description of NPR podcasts, I think. But it was a huge hunk of data. And it should have had information about 26 podcasts. And he got 7, and then it gets stuck. And he says, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Aha, this has got to be a classic Chuck Wade parsing edge case problem." But it's a giant thing. And so I load it into a test, and the test fails, and I try to cut it down. But it's giant, and I just speak of the devil. Uh, so I tried to cut it down, and I got stuck. Then uh, I got some sort of vaccination one day. And so I'm like feeling poorly, and I say, okay, today I'll let Claude drive. And it chased after parsing errors. And it was sure it had found it and corrected it. And no, now everything's broken. And it chased its tail for the whole afternoon. I eventually said, I'm reverting everything. This day never happened. And the bug went back in the box. This week, I gave it a firm talking to. We're going to work on this again, but we're going to do this by taking stuff out of this big hunk and simplifying it until the error goes away. Then we're going to put it back and simplify the rest. And we aren't leaving the test until we have a really simple uh, test case. And this took a couple of hours, but it was always moving forward and was always controlled and wasn't doing any damage outside of the test case. And eventually, we found two very short pieces of HTML, which were perfectly valid HTML. And if you removed either of these two short pieces, then everything was fine. But if you had both of them, it wasn't fine. And and at this point, I said, okay, here are these two pieces. Now look at the parser code and figure out what's going wrong. And it thought for 20 minutes, which is an extraordinarily long time, and came back and say, yeah, that was quite difficult. But here's what's going wrong. And if you change these two lines, uh, it'll be fine. And damn, it was fine. Uh,
And how long
it
do you think
couldn't solve the problem without me, and I patently wasn't able to solve the problem without it.
and how long do you think that 20 minute? Well, that 20 minutes could have been years for you if you had to do it on your own.
No, I would have got there, or I'd have given up and gotten there another day. It was a stupid edge case mistake in parsing quotations, and it involved a backslash quote inside a quotation and then a double quote. Later, alt equals quote quote, which is perfectly legitimate, not even esoteric, but the combination was just making it go nuts. It was a classic combination of the code is too complex. I should not have been doing this with a hand-built parser, but here we are. And the JSON was too complex. Do not load many, many web pages into your JSON payload. Something's bound to go wrong. But there you are.
All right, hey, Mark, I did say at the top of the hour I had a navigation utility question about Tinderbox. Can I share my screen? Show you that? I want to do that before we leave. It's not something that I'm even having trouble reproducing it myself. But the challenge is I open up a document like this one, and let me move that out of the way. And I want to go and move stuff around. And as I'm clicking around, Tinderbox, as by design, like thinks I'm wanting to edit the name of the image or of the note, but then I'm having trouble moving the note around. And if this happens, because my use case in this context is I want to like reorganize the order of my notes. And what ends up happening is it very quickly starts getting confused, and I start ending up with like this run case where as I'm then trying to drag notes around, they start jumping around and even popping over to other sections of my document. And I think it's because of my on visit action code. So if I click enough notes too quickly, the on visits start doing some kind of run race with them, and then I have a really hard time moving notes around in the UI. And like even right here, you saw I got that kind of pause where it's hard to move the notes around. And I showed it to Mark Anderson, and he kind of saw it. But whenever it's like one of those things, whenever I try to show people the problem, it doesn't. It's like doctor, it hurts when I do this, and you try to show the doctor, and it's not there. So, Mr. Anderson, how can you help me better explain what you think might be going on?
Well, I know you've got lots of on-visit code, and I think
Yeah.
as you're moving stuff around, basically you're getting into a race condition with all the code that you
Yeah,
unwittingly have asked the application to
I've asked it
run.
to do
So,
it.
so
Yeah.
that, here's the problem. So I mean, I don't mean it's a blame sense, but it's a self-imposed problem.
Right.
You set the starting condition that I must be able to do all this whenever this event happens. Then you do something that triggers that event, and that event causes the UI to slow down. So the simple answer is either don't do this stuff you need to do, or find another way, do your movement, say with a some command.
Oh yeah,
So
actually,
I want to move the selection from path X to path Y. But I think what's happening, I know you said also that depending on where you clicked, you were invoking the edit mode, which I think we got around by just clicking to the left rather than clicking onto the title, because that's just adding one more thing for the poor app, which is now struggling with all the things you've asked it to do. As to, well, which of the things you've asked me to do you actually want me to do? And it's trying its best, but you've given it far too much to do, and so you're not getting where you want. So it is a case of, yes, when I prod it, it hurts. Well, the answer is don't prod it. The thing we discussed is one of the things that we thought it might be was that you have code that renames when you rename a note, it renames effectively your short display string.
It doesn't.
And one of the things I suggested doing was to just let me finish a second to sort of finish out the thought, is that if you've got lots of code that you're running, probably in a big block inside a conditional, because obviously you don't want to run it all the time if the condition doesn't apply, but to extract the stuff that's only to do with the renaming, put in a sort of minimal condition block, so that executes as fast as possible. Because the thought when you showed this to me was that might be the thing that's holding it up. Now, if it's something else, I don't know, but that was the diagnosis we got to.
Well, and again, it's not renaming the note; it's renaming the display expression. And I think what's happening.
So, well, but that comes out of renaming the note.
Yeah.
So no, but you're not renaming. Well, when you rename the note, you rename the display expression. So it's a byproduct of renaming the note, or it's a byproduct of the app thinking you're renaming the note.
Right. Yeah. So here's like an example. Like, so if I go up here and I try, you can see it kind of slowing down, and I just move so fast. So if I rename the display expression, and then I try to go here to have it re-update the display expression, and then I try to move it, now you can kind of see right now how it's just kind of bouncing all around, and that can get kind of frustrating, because then all of a sudden just jump this move of the note somewhere else. And I do totally 100% agree it's a self-imposed problem.
But here's the thing, does it happen if you just turn off all the other stuff? Turn off the 99% that isn't the renaming, for instance. Does it still happen? Because the diagnosis you can do is to zero in, rather than Mark describing the JSON problem, is figure out which bit of all that code, and I don't know if Claude can do that or something for you, but you need to figure out which bit of all that vast amount of stuff that over months and months and months you've written is the bed blocker here, and is stopping progress.
I did. I think I narrowed it down to the display expression refreshing.
And in fairness, you're not, one thing it isn't, because that's something cropped up on the forum, it's not because you put a complex expression into the display name, into this display expression, because you're evaluating essentially the display expression outside, and simply the display expression is causing the string. But nonetheless, there's all that. I mean, it's not particularly small, it's not particularly complicated calculation, but I guess it's a big, it's a big thing to move around. There's a lot of notes, and it's a large outline, and I guess you're hitting a limit somewhere.
What's the on visit do?
Michael's gone away on us.
Oh, well, while he's there, well, it does all sorts of things, basically, because he had I mean, there's perfect logic to it, but essentially when he selects a note or leaves it, what he wants is to update a whole lot of criteria. So if something has changed, he wants some associated metadata about the note to be refreshed. So when he goes to a new note, part of the thing is that, so a note, for instance, doesn't have a display expression. So when he makes a new note, what he wants is because he uses prefixes for disambiguating things like where you've got multiple notes with the same name, because that's part of the structure of the document. So the suffixes and the prefixes, the prefixes rather, can help with disambiguating those. So it's all there for a reason. And there is, if I recall, there is a large number of conditionals as well, because just about everything is turn on and offable. Again, with good intent, but I suspect all these things begin to sort of stack up. I mean, I remember you explained to me a while back that if you have 1,200 notes with an edict, that even if the edict just says, if this condition, don't run, do nothing, otherwise run the edict, that's still, that's still 1,200 edicts, sort of conditions that have to be evaluated. And I sense there's probably some of that. So it's just basically getting hung up on effectively necessary but unwanted tests that I suspect could be refactored out. Not with ease, but probably a lot of the I suspect if the order and the sort of stacking, as it were, of the conditionals, it might be possible to make some of that go away. I suspect there's just an awful lot of stuff that's having to be evaluated for little return, which is why it seems odd. So you do something seemingly trivial, but actually there's a boatload of stuff happens in the background. No effect, because in this case, no effect was needed, but all that work had to be done, and all that work is what's holding up the UI refresh.
I have just a quick question on all of this. Is it the case? I mean, I know that within the inspector, you can look and see what tasks have piled up and what has to, still be processed. But is this where you can make use of Claude or one of its cousins and have it look at the processing and maybe give you a more sophisticated analysis? Is that capability in there, or am I, we're not there yet?
I don't think that the AI is going to be able to look at that.
Okay.
Mark,
Yeah.
do you happen to know, because I don't know offhand, whether on visit is called on mouse down or mouse up?
I don't know, because I think it predates our notion of even tracking those things. So
Right.
the answer
I
is no.
mean, it's tied to selection. I'd never actually thought about doing real work there. But one thing is, if it's doing enough work that if it happens to be on mouse down, and if it's doing a significant amount of work so that it takes, say, a second and a half, then you click. It does a second and a half of work. You've used up half of your 3 seconds before you actually get the feedback of it selecting the note. And so it feels like you've only got a second and a half instead of 3 seconds, which sounds pretty much like what Michael's experiencing.
Yes, that's exactly it. Yeah.
And that would be so one solution to that would be doing less at during the on visit, perhaps setting a flag so that you will later come and do the processing. But another one is, I think, probably on visit should be called after the UI has the whole UI thing is done, and it should be called after mouse up and not after mouse down. And so that's plausible. That may not be the problem, but it's plausible.
Well, and I can. And by the way, I disappeared for a bit. My new office has a power issue, and so I can't. I'm needing to have an electrician come and fix the fix the circuit breaker. I have to reset the circuit breaker at least twice a day. It's kind of annoying. But first world problem in my free rented room, so I'm good. Um, yeah. So here's the issue, and just so you can see the code. So it's essentially what I'm asking it to do is not only change the name and the display expressions, but also interrogate attributes and create notes and create links and do unlinking if necessary. So it is a lot. And especially if there's a lot of values in those attributes. And what I find and what I struggle with the way I work, and maybe it's the ADHD thing, but having those Boolean cute flags and having to remember to go back and update that particular individual note, I find that really difficult in my workflow because, especially when I'm writing my textbooks, I'm on the fly creating values and attributes, which are creating glossary term notes for me, which I then want linked to the notes, which are then being used by other functions, like particularly agents, to make sure that glossary of terms is properly updated in the index. And it's a lot. And so I'm struggling, like, how do I help the tool keep pace with all of that?
Another bit of good news is not the current update, 11.6.1, but the next backstage release, probably Tuesday or Wednesday this week, has some changes that make the map view faster. And that may actually have some impact here.
Would
But
it?
I suspect we know the the cause of this now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, would it be helpful for me to send this file to you so you can mess around
Yes.
with it? All right. I'll send that to you. All right. Yeah, and again, to Mark Anderson's point, it's not the tool's fault. It's a completely self-imposed problem. I'm trying to figure out how to get around it.
I think it's an interesting observation to make because you're absolutely right. I mean, this is nobody's deliberate fault. Is you're not putting all this code because you wanted to make life difficult for yourself. It was all
Right.
stuff you thought you needed to make, and it's a really difficult thing. And I certainly know someone without a formal coding background that while sometimes it's obvious after the fact, thinking, yes, oh well, I gave it all the stuff to do, but it's really hard to it is really hard if you're learning as you go to know when to, I guess the word is refactor, where you say, right, I need to tear this down and I need to restructure it because I've actually created a problem for myself unintentionally that I know is hitting effectively a finite, resource issue with the software, with the hardware, whatever.
Well,
And that's really hard to spot.
and you also have the psychological issues that come with it, in that you've got I don't remember the right term, but you've invested all of this time to get it to that point, and now you realize, well, fuck, I don't want to have to go back and reinvest all of that time to fix it.
Yeah.
And so you've got kind of that opportunity cost investment psychology that's there, and then at the same sunk cost, that's it, and then at the same time you have a deadline. Like I've got deadlines to get these reports or these articles or these papers out, and I don't want to be refactoring code when I actually do, like, much like Chuck's comment in the beginning. It's like he's got real work to do, and so how do you balance that real work to do with the fact that I want to learn this stuff with the fact that I don't want to be having to spend time refactoring? Which by the way goes back to Mary Beth's comments of, but I think there's this perceived view of the difficulty of learning Tinderbox, and in some ways, in the purest sense, Tinderbox is actually very easy to learn. But when you combine it with the other psychological challenges of time, energy, effort, past experience, your point about, like, I'm not a coder, but so therefore I'm going to learn optimization stuff along the way, that all compounds. You're nodding, Mark. How do you interpret that
No, no,
No,
ball of comments that I threw out there?
was it which mark was that?
Either one. Anybody? I just,
Well,
I
okay.
just,
So
I just
I'll
tossed
just
a
quickly
giant
say
beer
that
ball on the table.
I can sense it at the moment. I'm just starting a big project with the Tinderbox project. One of the things I'm so having to go back to someone said, well, look, the reason it's complicated is you're trying to move absolutely every single board on the piece all at once. I know it's what you want to do, and you have an overview. But the problem with a mental palace is it's only a palace to one person. To everybody else, it's just a wasteland, because all anybody else gets is your vague approximation of the beautiful picture you have within. And so you do just have to sort of tear it down. So that's one of the ways that gives you something towards the optimization, is to ask yourself, well, what am I actually doing? So
Yeah.
rather than, I think, and again, I think this probably comes because of the way we're trained to use the software that you most regularly work with, where the game is, what you've got to work out is in which order to push the buttons to get the prize at the end. And there isn't much flexibility, but it doesn't always explain which buttons to push. Here you're working with something much more open-ended, and indeed it is akin to writing software code, where you have much power, much responsibility. Here you're sort of doing it through something that abstracts it away, because even if you're not using any automation, in a sense you're still playing the same game. You've got all this flexibility, you've got all these tools, all these different views you can use, and what I observe, and it's true of me. I mean, I'm not, I see it less in myself because I can't watch myself. My brain's not that big. But when I watch other people, what I constantly see is people, basically what they're doing is they have an imagined outcome, and all the time they're saying, how not like the outcome is what I've got, which is a really, really, really bad way of trying to solve a problem. Mm-hmm. Because you get a lot of frustration and you get very little progress. But if you just step back and break it down, as which is sort of possible, the frustration, of course, comes that when you do that, you tend to feel you're not making any progress, because you now can't see how close you are to the beautiful picture you have in your mind. But
Well,
you just have to have a degree of trust.
Example of that is, for at some point I screwed up in one of my files, or I forgot one of the steps on how to go from my Tinderbox file to an automated publishing a Pandoc. And a couple days ago, I wasted like a half an hour, probably lost a year of my life out of frustration. And then it just dawned on me, why am I forcing it to do that when I could just copy the text, put it in a BB edit file, and then run the command line, and I'm done. And as soon as I figured that out, I had what I needed in 30 seconds, but I spent a half an hour wanting it to work the way I wanted it to work in that moment. And it's that balance, right? Because at some point I want to go back to Chuck's point. I want to go back and figure out how to make it work the way I want it to work. But in that moment, I didn't need to. I could solve my problem in 30 seconds. And that's more of a human issue. Like, how do we deal with that? We've got our resident psychologist, Bruce. How do we deal with that?
Be better
We have
humans.
1 minute left. Why do you do this to me?
Yeah.
We all go down that rabbit hole. You know that. And Mark Bernstein, to your credit, you repeatedly advise us that sometimes just copying and pasting 10 times is better than figuring out the code to make it do automatically.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you learned your lesson. You know what? If I only waste a half an hour on any given day, I call that a win.
Yeah, remember, I can't say I learned my lesson. I'm sure I'm going to do it again, but that's the problem. But in a different context.
So Mark Anderson, next year, should we warn you in advance when daylight savings is coming? Or possibly this fall?
Oh, right. Have we hit that point?
Yes, we have.
Yeah.
Oh,
yes, we did last
I
night.
wondered why you were well at things. Oh well. Can I part for next week? I just said to say that, to my great surprise, I'm having absolutely no success in getting Claude to work. And what I'm amazed, I can't. Every time I come back to it, it doesn't work for a new, different reason. It can't follow aliases. It can't read an HTML page is too big to read. All sorts of just stuff that doesn't make sense for something that's supposed to be really clever. So I'm clearly doing something wrong. So if anyone knows I mean, what would be really useful, and I think it gets back to the onboarding thing, is that's what I hope we could do with Andreas's thing is the exhibition is fine, but what you really want is right now. Here are the steps to follow on your own computer with the same material and get to something that's roughly the same, which gets to the point where I now have confidence that the thing I've seen happen does actually happen. And they're two different trust states. The first one is, oh, yeah, I'll have a go at this. The next one is, yeah, but it doesn't work on my machine. But when you get to the second point, then you're thinking, okay, now I'm confident I'd start twiddling the bits. But it's really interesting just how hard it's been to try and get Claude code to do, well, I can't get it to do anything. It can't even tell me if I mean, if MCP is working, it can't tell me if there's a file open. That doesn't make sense because I thought the whole point of the bridge was, or it wants to go off and mess around with AppleScript, which it doesn't need because it has a bridge that allows it to ask a question. And if I ask Claude as opposed to Claude code, it says, yes, here we go.
Yeah.
You've got a thing open. And I'm it's probably because I tend to look at what's going on and look at the messages. It probably doesn't help because I tend to think, well, that shouldn't be happening. But nonetheless, it's sort of frustrating because I had hoped this week I actually might do something meaningful with Claude, and I have achieved zero, absolute zero.
So, Mark, you're
Which goes
asking
back
if
to the
we
part.
could. You're asking if we could just do a simple tutorial on that.
Yeah,
I would love that.
I mean, essentially, I think we had a really good example with Andreas thing because it took a public. So you can go on the forum. There's no. It's information anyone can get, and the only aim of the tutorial is to take your system and get to something that won't be the same because there's an element of an approximation, but you should be able to get to the same endpoint he did, i.e. the process diagram. That to me would be a really, or we can make another one, but that's sort of what's needed because it's a totally different question to have you installed the app. It's that, okay, now you've got that. Even to another thing I've noticed is people say, well, you just ask a question. Well, everyone asks questions different ways, and it turns out it does matter how you ask the question, how you phrase it. So there's a lot of, this is a problem with language. There's a lot of nuance in there that's so intuitive once we know it, that it's just the sort of tacit knowledge that doesn't need speaking. But in fact, what I'm detecting is there's quite a bit of it in there. And so to get to the sunny out plans of what you're seeing people do, there seem to be quite a few missing steps at the moment that are quite a sort of distance apart from just installing, making sure the bridge is working. And Mark's done some nice stuff in the new backstage release again to give an indication that at least that bit's there. And so another thing I find is I'm constantly chopping from release to beta because if I do something for someone on the forum, I try and use the public release in case I'm using something that's if I use a beta and I'm something that's fixed there that doesn't work, that's really unkind to someone in the main forum. But I keep the betas, well, they can't live in the same folder. So I keep the release in the applications, which is the normal installed place, and I keep the beta on the desktop. And I'm not quite sure, for instance, whether Claude can keep up with that. In my mind's eye, well, yeah, Mark's showing it. I'm not surprised because they're different places. But it's sort of interesting. Like I watched it earlier today, and it went off and said, "Ask Tinderbox 9 in AppleScript about something." I thought, well, that's weird. A, where does it get Tinderbox 9 from? And B, why? Because then the next thing I saw is it did something mentioning Tinderbox 11. So in the AppleScript world, it can sort of do that. Oh, what you really wanted was the current working instance of Tinderbox. And at the moment, the AI is not clever enough to do that. That will probably come in due course. And again, it's not a complaint, but it shows the problem because if you've got to constantly do the stance that each time you close Tinderbox, you've then got to work out, okay, well, is Claude running? Do I have to restart Claude? And then you've got to remember which documents you had open. So in other words, you're constantly, what I find is your brain is full of trying to remember the state that this machine that's supposed to make your life easier is supposed to know for you and doesn't. So, I mean, it's a failure for if there are any IA developers are listening, that it's a failure of the tool. It should be taking care of that, and it will, I'm sure, but not today. Because if it can't do that, it's not really being sort of human-like in its help. It's just being another bit of hard-edged logic, albeit gussied up with some human-like written output.
Yeah.
So to take us full circle from where we started today, and unfortunately, Mark, you missed the introduction. Dave Rogers kicked us off and asked the question, who's using AI with Tinderbox? And I think somebody pointed a finger at me. I said, well, I'm not yet. And it's because after, as I'm in my 75th year, I take a look at this and say, yep, that's not going to be as easy as it looks. And so, experience from being around in this world and dealing with a lot of technology over many years, I know when to say, that's not going to be so easy. And hence, the reason I put it off is because I've got a whole bunch of other things I've absolutely got to get done. And therein lies the challenge. And the impediment to making forward progress is often there are too many things you actually have to do before you can get to the stuff that you'd like to do. And I think that's where we are.
Let's not sound a bum note. I mean, I genuinely took great inspiration from Andreas's demo and actually had a couple of hours conversation with him the other evening. Well, we didn't run a stuff to talk about it. So I sense what it can do. The interesting thing is that I suppose after years of writing, not so much documentation, because I noticed they really set up when I said, documentation is written by the wrong people. When I said that, I wasn't referring to people giving you, instructions as to how to, unmantle and remantle your engine and make sure there are no parts left over when you do it. But process documentation is definitely not done by the right people, because it's not a mechanical process. It's a human involved process, and you really, really have to think about what the human is doing and not just what the machine is doing.
Well, and part of that,
and that's where I think some of the information about getting going with the AI is missing.
And case in point, like you and I were talking about that last week, where in Andreas's demo, that one step of uploading the Claude skills in the configuration menu was missing in his demonstration, and you can't do anything he was demonstrating without that. So what do you do? And then how do you document that, and how do you make sure it's consistently there, and people know how to download the file, and that people know to be able to trust the downloading of that file. That was one of my biggest earlier fears when I was first using Tinderbox. Is I'm like, Mark Bernstein, who is this guy? And I'm going to be installing this software from the internet, and what the hell is that going to do to my computer? I've since gotten over that trust factor, but that's a real thing. Yeah, Mr. Bernstein.
For scheduling, I think it actually might be fun to do a follow along at home and with Claude or Claude Code or Gemini, and just go through it, even though we wouldn't get very far. But I think it's time for that. I think it will be better to do it with the next release because, like Friday, I guess, I added a couple of little blinking lights to one of the inspectors that shows you whether the MCP is hooked up or not. And you can get into situations where the MCP is disconnected and needs to be reconnected somehow. And I think it makes it much easier to know when things are wrong. Now, I had assumed that all you would have to do is ask Claude, is MCP on? But that's like asking your left kidney if it's functioning. You just have no insight into it. And neither does Claude. If MCP is working, it's just there. And if it's not working, it's not there. And what's MCP? It's not obvious, but it's the way this thing works, at least this year. Tom?
Oh, we just lost. Oh, there, Tom. Do you have a question? You're on mute if you do.
Ah, all right. Can you hear me?
That's funny. By the way, Dave, that's funny. Your comment. Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Can you? I was just going to add to the comment you made about the skills. If I'm not mistaken, there's two different places you've got to put the skills for it to work. If you put it in the root folder, that's for Claude, and if you want to use Claude Code, you've got to put that in the folder. There's another uh, Claude Code
Yeah, there's a
hidden
configuration section.
folder. Yeah, so you got to put it in two different places for those two to work.
Hmm. Yep.
Okay. Thank you so much, guys. I've got a Pasolite to go fix.
Yeah. See ya.
That was
Bye
that was
bye.
fun, guys. Thank you.
Bye all.